session, we have Professor Meenakshi Pillai from University of Kerala. I welcome Madam to come. I invite Madam to come upon the stage. Please come on the stage, Madam. Please. I also invite Professor Sujata Madam from University of Mysore, who is going to chair this session. Please come on the stage, Madam. To give you all a brief introduction or background of Professor Meenakshi Pillai. You know, Meenakshi Pillai teaches in the University of Kerala and is also known, also a renowned scholar in the field of cultural studies, and she is a Fulbright doctoral fellow from the University of Ohio, Columbus, a Shastri fellow to the Mel Popham School of Cinema, Concordia University, and a Commonwealth Fellow at the Media Studies Center, University of Sussex. University of Sussex. She won the Fulbright Professional Excellence Award and taught at the University of California at Los Angeles. So publications includes Translating Kerala, Affective India, Gender and Modernity, Women in Malayalam Cinema, Naturalizing Gender Hierarchies by Orient Black Swan, and a chapter in the Routledge Handbook of Indian Cinemas, and Beyond Bollywood, the cinemas of South India. She has also published widely on issues like culture, gender, and cinema, and her essays have been part of books and anthologies by many international publishers. So, dear friends, give her a big round of applause. And thank you, Madam, for being part of this conference. I request all the participants to get inside the auditorium. So the session Madam is going to address you all now.
None of the things, good afternoon to all of you. None of the things that Dr. Srikanth read out now were sent by me, so I had nothing to do with it. I think he must have got online. But anyway, the last session, and he said that the chairperson of the film chamber or something was going to come to the next session, which is a valedictory session. I don't think that you would very much like to hear some of the things that I'm going to say, because I'm going to do a little bit of speaking which probably goes against the very grain of cinema as art. Most of us have worked largely on the superstructural elements of cinema. We have talked about representation, including me. We've talked about hegemony and ideology and all that, the gaze. But today what I want to do is to take a look at the base itself. And maybe in the process critique some of the relations of production that are so intrinsic to cinema, because it is not just an art, it's a syncretic art. It is also an industry. So it is walking a tightrope walk in this kind of a space, and that is where I want to bring in the relations of production, particularly vis-a-vis gender, and look at some of the fraught kinds of histories and terrains that cinema occupies at the very base level. Now, when we look at cinema as an industry, what about the women who work in the industry? I begin with a question. Do women workers in the cinema industry, call it Mollywood, Bollywood, Hollywood, or whatever, Tollywood, do they have the right to have rights? It's a difficult question and an uneasy question. And the reason why I ask the question is because this question forms the subtext of a recent report on the status of women in the cinema industry that was brought out by a committee which is called the HEMA Committee report. I think many of you in this hall would know about it. Now, the HEMA Committee report, interestingly, unfurled a map of dystopian conditions of women's labor in Malayalam cinema, a world of gender oppression, sexual discrimination, harassment, violence, and abuse, where I'm using certain terms that do not sink in with many of our sensibilities, but prostitution, sextortion, harassment, all of which go under the pseudonym of compromise and adjustment. Of the estimated 158 million people, nearly 160 million people, who frequent movie halls in India, more than half are women. And yet, in 2025, we continue to speak about casting couches, right? As though it is quite normal. And many of us also have the feeling that maybe this is, what greases the wheels of our entertainment industry. Now, looming behind the shadows of the megastar, big budget movie projects that are so assiduously produced and directed mostly by men and are tirelessly filled with plots that deprecate, degrade, and demean women. I don't think anybody would challenge that here. Do we find the same dated misogyny being meted out to women who are laboring on the sets of cinema, of the cinema industry? So, this is the fundamental question that I want to ask. Are underprivileged women being treated as slaves? There are different kinds of slavery in our entertainment industries. And mostly what happened after the HEMA Committee report and against the women who spoke out is the silence around the appalling environments of their labor, a precondition for women's employment in cinema. Women who spoke out are out of employment. So this is where I need to give in a little bit of the history that I'm talking about. 19 August 2024 marks a historic moment in Indian cinema in that for the first time ever in the history of Indian cinema, a 233-page report of a committee set up to study the workplace challenges of women in a cinema industry anywhere in the world was released. You know. Now, in 2017, in a rather striking move, so this was many years before the publication of the result of the report, in a rather to study the issues faced by women in the industry in Kerala, the film industry in Kerala. Now, what precipitated this moment or this movement was, of course, as all of you would know, the sexual assault of a female actor in a moving car in broad daylight in 2017, apparently masterminded by a superstar, which triggered the bold resistance of women, of a few women in the Malayalam industry, and culminated in the formation of what is called the Women in Cinema Collective. I believe that wherever there is power, going along with Foucault, wherever there is power, there is also resistance. And the HEMA committee report can be seen as a product of a certain kind of labor of resistance, where a few women refuse to capitulate to the cultures of silence, of oppression, and gender based exploitations that form the very foundations of our culture industries. This is where I want to talk a little bit about what I call feudal libidinal economies. Now, the various efforts to kill or bury the report, resulting in over 4.5 years of governmental inaction, after the submission of the report in 2019. It was submitted in 2019 but released in 2024. And the reasons for citing the publication of the report were technicalities and reasons of confidentiality. Uh, Both of which, the way it was put forward, they were put forward, makes one suspect of it of probable acts of nepotism, dubious liaisons, and unholy collusions between industry barons and political actors. And I would say this was irrespective of party affiliations because it cut across the left, right, and the center. Perchance built around circulation of corrupt capital and the unhindered reaping of patriarchal dividends within, again, the feudal artistic economies that I'm speaking about. The resultant, what I have always called flamboyant fanboy networks. Yesterday, Dr. Srinivas did touch upon it a little bit. The fanboy networks of hegemonic masculinity that are fed by, and they are not just one, part, one cog of the wheel. They're also fed by the neoliberal market and a growing middle class veneration of power which enshrine deeply undemocratic ideals fueled by the spectacles of larger than life heroes that the magic of cinema often unfolds. It also seamlessly conceals the unhindered circulation of less than licit, I won't call them illicit completely, I would say they are less than licit transactions in and through the cinema industry, creating a colossal economic as also a libidinal system that has become so difficult to dismantle. Thus, the finally overly redacted HEMA committee report made available to the public, where the nature and extent of that redaction was in excess of what was required, heavily redacted, less than one-third of the report, reflects the undue authority wielded by a certain kind of a web of, people powerful enough to subvert the citizens' right to access information. So this is where I want to put forward the idea of a patriarchal deep state, which I feel often can be understood only by the revelations of certain kinds of machinations that it puts in place. Now, after the publication of the report, the Malayalam industry, cinema industry, as many other industries in India, was taken by storm as numerous women, actors, junior artists, technicians came out in public naming and shaming powerful men in the industry, including the secretary of AMMA. AMMA is the Association of Malayalam Movie Actors, which caused the resignation and then Yet, though the government of Kerala announced the setting up of a force to register cases against those whose names were being called out, the onus of proving the crime was still on the women themselves. the discrete withdrawal of the state from the sight of women's struggle, which just doesn't happen only in the cinema industry, but we are seeing it all around. So the state very discreetly withdrawing itself from the sight of such struggles. We speak of the state's capitulation to the structural demands of a capital intensive industry, which cinema basically is, and to the larger question of whose interests become the state's interests. We can talk about crony capitalism, we can talk about predatory patriarchy. I mean, they are all colored and pejorative phrases. But the compounded nature of what I call that, the banality of evil that haunts the industrial precincts of cinema, ranging from, and I want to stress upon each of these, gender pay gap, sexual and labor exploitation, of course, commodification of women, which we have talked about a lot. All of these warrant their use to illustrate the gendered collusion, corruption, and the re-feudalization of spaces and values supposedly protected by the state through the intervention of non-state actors, pressure groups, and corporations. So the formation of the Women in Cinema Collective, the WCC itself, thus becomes an instance of what people like Fraser have called the rise of the subaltern counterpublics. One that would rock the boat of patriarchy in other fields, as when women from political parties began hinting at casting culture. So this happened subsequent to the release of the report. This happened in Kerala, where women in political parties began saying that casting couches are not just in the film industry, they are there elsewhere also. So, you know, there were multiple strategies of discipline and punish against women who spoke out, expelling them, unwritten bans and sanctions against them. So, which extends into all domains of gendered quotidian life in Kerala, whether within the precincts of the intimate or the public, is at its root what you see is an ideologically repressive mechanism that seeks to coerce female bodies into conformity with dominant values, channeling, and that is where I think it is important to take note of that, channeling the labor into productive modes that serve patriarchal caste and class norms. Many of these women were called feminities, as many of you would know, a vernacular kind of a sexist slur that sought to discredit the feminist enterprise in their labor. And many of the women in WCC were called feminities because they sought to question the power lobby in the industry. And as I said, many were punished with invisible employment bans. Now, after the release of the report, an avalanche of female dissidents hit numerous social, cultural, and political institutions in India and has begun to erupt, I believe, and I believe with a lot of hope in other regional film industries, including that of Karnataka, warranting some thoughts on the possible existence of a patriarchal deep state which lies below the surface of the state itself. And by this, when I say there is a deep state at work in the culture industries in India, what I mean is, it's not just a state, it is a private network embedded in a darker, misogynist cultural repository that, like the deep web, for example, is inaccessible and anonymous to the public, yet whose machinations are revealed in the everyday through repeated insurgencies against gender justice and equity. So there are all these laws that support gender justice and equity. But how is it that all these laws are also thrown to the wind? Not many people seem to get justice out of it. So there is some kind of a working that happens beneath. So it is, as I said, a network of private individuals, political actors, corporate stakeholders, bureaucratic and judicial machineries, media houses, and organizations operating around layered inscriptions, values, beliefs, and economies that traffic in what I call gendered contraband, and which pay scant attention or scant respect to either constitutional or social morality around gender issues. Many of these might be rigid, intransigent individuals, institutions, structures, and processes, prisoners of received patriarchal norms, bent on promoting changes and shifts around conventional gender dynamics. Now, women who break out of the patriarchal mold, as you see now online and offline, are slut shamed and trolled on social media, banned at work, and socially ostracized or lynched into the margins. And there are many, many women actors in Kerala now who are sitting in the margins, sitting in the wings because they can't find work. It often transforms into a post-truth arrangement where truth is a necessary casualty, suffering multiple distortions such as fake news, communication noise, deceit, deception, and propaganda, as also misogynist jokes, trolls, and hate news, all of which serve to undermine the progressive shifts around gender norms and policies in the larger state. Now, a gender just democracy is defeated first and foremost, I feel, by this patriarchal deep state because there is some kind of a conspiracy afoot with ideological underpinnings that brings to heel any attempt to alter the forms and functions of received organizational gender paradigms and landscapes. Now, this is by no means to discount the fact that new policies or new policy decisions and progressive shifts around gender are not being envisaged or implemented by governments. I'm not saying that. But to argue that there could be invisible ways by which, ways within bureaucracies, within judiciaries, and social mindsets that jeopardize and torpedo such new directives, laws, and policies. Now, this is where I want to bring in another concept or another idea that I've been working on for quite some time now, the unionization of patriarchy. I think many of you would be part of teachers' unions. What do unions do as far as gender is concerned? Now, the HEMA committee report laid bare the appalling silences that have sedimented in the corridors of power in our cinema industries, one that is nursed and nurtured by the different cine associations and unions, which were apparently formed for the protection of at workplace of artists, of technicians, of dancers, of junior artists, amongst others. Now, the report actually hints at the fact that these unions might have put in place imperceptible bans preventing members from testifying openly before the committee. So the unions actually put on bans from women going to the committee and testifying before them. And it says that, and the Film Employees Federation of Kerala, FEFCA, on their website says that it is the apex body of 21 trade unions, working at various levels of the Malayalam film industry with a total of 8,284 members spread across 21 unions of directors, technicians, editors, art directors, cinematographers, musicians, mess workers, drivers, and others working in every department associated with the film set. This is from the FEFCA website. Interestingly, subsequent to the formation of the WCC, FEFCA formed a women's forum. It did not use the word union, it formed a women's forum. Though the word union was avoided in the script, it was pointed out that the dedicated women's wing would address the issues faced by women who form a minority amongst the 6,000 odd members from 19 different work fields. The AMMA also, the Association of Malayalam Movie Stars, which is said to function as a welfare association, if they again avoid the use of the term union, claims that it was founded in 1994 and is registered under the Travancore Cochin Literary, Scientific and Charitable Societies Act. And on the website it says, completing 29 years of dedicated service as its members, to its members and society at large, and stands as a powerful collective in the Malayalam film industry with a current membership of 498, including 253 men and 245 women. So look at 253 men and 245 women. What is very interesting is that this association has schemes like Kai Neetam. Kai Neetam is Vishu is the New Year for Malayalis, and Kai Neetam is actually a ritualistic gift of cash, which also, in a sense, smacks of an overtly feudal vocabulary, which had a number of caste, scripting of caste on its body. So Amma was brought under the scrutiny after the Hema Committee report pointed out that a power lobby was functioning within the industry, and there was an en masse resignation of its members subsequent to the boat being rocked by the women's hashtag #MeToo allegations post the release of the report. Now, Amma claims that it operates as a family. All it does is that it is a family of film association movie actors. Now, this statement by Amma was itself taken up by many feminist organizations in Kerala because it has a larger balance, given that the family often operates as one of the most undemocratic of institutions in the state, one into which you can actually not gain entry and question some of the things happening there. One where women find themselves repeatedly sabotaged by the intimate and the routine. So it has been pointed out that the film trade associations, organizations, and unions, even while using the language of welfare with regard to compensatory health, monetary, and pensionary benefits, might in return demand compliance from the workers, entailing organizational loyalty, which would mean turning a blind eye to many of the larger structural problems within the union itself. The modus operandi of discipline and punish, as pointed out earlier, thus becomes an entitlement of the organizational heads or the union leaders, creating male overlords who can make or mar the lives of smaller people in the industry, who by virtue of their caste, of their class or gender, find themselves in grave positions of disadvantage. So the history of women's relationship with trade unions has been a fraught one, with most trade unions barely tolerating a proactive feminist thought or action in their agendas. Oftentimes, unions themselves are structurally seeped in sexism, informed by dominant belief systems prevailing in the society that view women's primary role as caregivers at home, thus always already delegitimizing women's labor force participation while valorizing her otherness within the market economy. So the cultural expectations of women within unions are as patriarchal as elsewhere. That's the point I'm trying to make. Guaranteeing women neither employment equality nor workplace security, particularly, and I want to repeat, particularly in very fragile environments like the entertainment industry. Moreover, women's deeper aspirations for acceptance and respectability within a hostile workplace often make them complicit in this discriminatory logic. I think you and I, many of the women in this room, and I know what I'm trying to talk about. So it is interesting in this context to speculate on why there are not many feminist labor associations in India. I think that's a question that we really need to take up. Trade and labor unions, associations in cinema seem to be able to keep gender policies and laws of the land under the bushel, raising uneasy speculations around the possibility of the leaders being part of political elite networks that favor a particular kind of corporatist coordination between the state, capital, and labor. I think again that's a very important point that people working in this area should be taking note of. As in no other industry, cinema offers scope for representatives of both the capitalist enterprise and labor to come together in and through collaborations around class and unaudited privileges, engendering a consensus around gender among elite political networks. And what happens is the elites in the industry forge a syndicate of power. I've earlier written about this in the APW, where the syndicate which actually brings together the Film Producers Association, the Film Directors Associations, the Film Distributors Association. So it is a syndicated power, and oftentimes you cannot go against it if you're within the industry. So a syndicate of power that define labor relations, which results in the increasing control and regimentalization of artists and technicians. Women workforce are more predisposed to becoming necessary casualties of the ensuing, clandestine economies that dip into, again, I call them less than licit businesses and partnerships, including money laundering, hawala dealings, predatory, economic transactions, pimping, blackmail, extortion, and loan sharking that would reflect the characters and features of such mafiadoms in the film industry, in the culture industry. So what I want to emphasize is that no industry, let alone the film industry, or no market is a gender neutral space. Entertainment industries and their markets, all the more not. The gravity of the situation is exacerbated by the fact that political parties in India are neither equipped nor willing to take a gendered approach to the political economy, one which would critique the nation's current systems of production and employment that are so deeply tarnished and deformed by systemic sexism, casteism, and social prejudices, which would necessitate an inward eye on their own party structures, which each political party should be able to do that supports an unequal gender order. So it is in this context that I want to talk about what is euphemistically known as the extras in the film industry. Because without talking about the extras and the extra labor, I think an inquiry of this kind would be incomplete. So extra labor in the sexual economy of culture industries. Now, women in cinema work in smaller and more vulnerable workplaces. You might have a set that is in a remote location. How do you protest when something happens to you? You might not have the fundamental, the basic, necessities. There would not be toilet facilities. So how do you protest? So women in cinema work in very small and often much more vulnerable workplaces prone to labor redundancies. A large contingent of women who work in very minor roles form the invisible face of cinema industry's exploitative labor. You only look at the stars at the top, but what about a huge number of women who actually fall at the bottom, who form the base of this exploitative labor? Earlier degraded and dehumanized as extras or bit players and stand-ins, they are euphemistically referred to as junior artists now. That is the way we call them now. It has been pointed out that in industries like Hollywood, for example, the very word extra implied expendability. They could be expendable. Their labor was expendable, with their work being downplayed and devalued, attributed with questionable morality, and considered the latest incarnation of the fallen woman. A lot of studies have happened in Hollywood around the figure of the extra, emerging both as a representative and a rationale for the type of labor whose worth could be discounted. Moreover, people who have studied in this area, like McKenna, argue that the very anonymity and exchangeability of their work made it impossible for them to negotiate with their employers or claim their right as workers, even. So, though there are men who work as extra artists, both inhabiting the lowest paying rungs of the entertainment industry, a woman's right to earn a fair wage can be rendered more perilous. It is fraught with much more danger. So the codes of fantasy and transience, which underscore the very semantics, which underscore the very grammar of cinema and its fundamental economy built on scopophilia that finds value in salacious kinds of detailing, comes to define, so in varying degrees, the lives of both female stars as also junior artists. In being both integral and expendable to its sexual economy, women could be easy scapegoats to cinema's male cabals and their discriminatory logic, which, while exercising institutional domination over women's labor, also seems to enjoy exclusive rights over the objectification and commodification of the bodies on screen. So what I'm arguing is that we you all know about Laura Mulvey and the theorizations around the male gaze, for example, in cinema. So Mulvey's male gaze, which operates at the level of the camera, in and through the characters, in the story, as also the voyeuristic spectator, I argue, can be found equally applicable in the manner of its spillages into women's work culture. So the male gaze is equally operative in the relations of labor and the production itself, the process itself, and labor within the industry. People like McKenna have pointed out that the extra girl in Hollywood, for example, became a modern allegory for screen labor, where to the advantage of the industry, she represented a sublimation of labor through her association with the discovery narrative. You could be discovered by a director. Through the discovery narrative that cast her in a passive role, that she was waiting to be discovered, not working. She was waiting to be discovered, and certainly she was not striking to improve her life. So this is actually a very interesting observation, and it is this extra labor so easily translatable into the sexual economy of the casting couch. It becomes very easy then, right? Which simultaneously masks the lack of fair wages, maternity benefits, and the perils of unregulated working conditions on sets. Now, what does the ICC do here? The Internal Complaints Committee. What does it do? Now, one particularly striking comment in the HEMA committee report was that regarding the Internal Complaints Committee, it had a very interesting comment on ICCs. In the context of the writ petition that was filed by the WCC for constituting ICCs in all levels of the industry, AMA, that is the Association of Movie Stars, argued that it is only an association of artists and its activities will not fall under the purview of workplace, and therefore it cannot be bound by the sexual harassment of women at workplace, the Prevention, Prohibition and Repressal Posh Act of 2013. Now, the government contended that if no ICC is, complied with, if no ICC is formed by the employer, then the aggrieved actor or the intra actor, whoever, can actually be free to approach the local complaints committee. The HEMA committee, however, points out something that's very interesting. It says that even if the Honorable High Court finds ultimately that ICCs can be formed in cinema, they would be most hesitant, that is, the people who constituted the committee would be most hesitant to believe that it would be a panacea for all evils in the industry, since, and this is a very interesting part of the committee report, since the male oligarchy in cinema would ensure that its henchwomen would be members in ICCs. Right? Now, isn't there a familiar echo there? I'll not go into it. So, ICCs. I think they are also saying that the very purpose of ICCs would be defeated by such a logic. So the bifurcation of gender and labor inherent in ICC erases the fact that gender discrimination is embedded within labor relations, raising the question of how prudent it is to sublet. I'm saying again, I'm repeating again, to sublet the responsibility of providing working women justice against sexual discrimination by committees that are constituted by the management themselves. This is a very pertinent question that the HEMA committee report raises. And the committee, I think, strikes at the very central fault lines of the POSH Act, that sexual harassment is engendered precisely due to the insecurities and imbalances brought about by power lobbies in the workplace, which then ensures the torpedoing of the very process. Uh, the WCC, in their Facebook post, for example, has suggested a cinema code of conduct, a code of conduct in cinema, which involves the issuance of a properly documented labor contract. Now, many of these women, particularly the junior artists, do not sign a contract. They don't get to sign a contract even. So there is nothing that they can take to a legal, process. So that is why the WCC says that maybe there should be contracts, very clearly spelled out labor documents for all city workers, the spelling out of remuneration and payment terms, and the inclusion of POSH terms in all contracts alongside mechanisms for reporting breaches of contract and a whole set of clauses that would empower women on cinema sets. Now, women suffer heavily in low paid, insecure, and often unsafe jobs in the cinema industry, and the government should take up steps to guarantee the dignity of labor, as also decent wages, safe working environments, and implementation of social protection like healthcare and maternity benefits alongside minimum living wages. I think these are all some of the points that I wanted to raise here. What I want to emphasize finally is the fact that while cinema is an artistic enterprise, we need to situate it within new kinds of, neoliberal capital intensive, precincts, which by forging continuations with moments in the past where we easily forgive such kind of feudal, what I call liberal economies, makes it so easy to render invisible the kind of violences that are inflicted upon women in the industry. I think I would end by saying that let us not form the conclusion that cinema industry could reveal a crisis within democracy, which makes one ask, are patriarchal oligarchies so powerful that they can lobby the state to invoke legal justice as a sole panacea for redressal of women's issues in the cine industry? Who will address the question of social justice? Is it only the government or also academics, scholars, people working in the industry? So I think this is where I would like to end by saying that we need to, maybe when we look at all these things within the artistic enterprise, as we call it, of cinema, we will get a different picture when we think about it in the context of literature, which doesn't require the same kind of labor, which doesn't have maybe the same kinds of vulnerabilities, but maybe alongside that, we should also think of industries like publishing and other areas. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, one and all. Just now we listened to Professor Meena T. Pillai, who spoke very interestingly the kind of, I can even say politics that is involved in movies, especially her paper, Gender, Labor, Myth-Making, New Effective Economies in Cinema and Literature. Actually, she spoke of Hema Committee. She started her talk with Hema Committee, which was a committee formed in Kerala to address the sexual harassment took place to one of the actresses. Oh, and this committee was just a symbolic. With this committee, there have been many other committees like AMA and WCC and the Union of Film Associations, many are there. Throughout her paper, through multiple examples, as well as by many references to newspaper, etc., she told us how contradictory these committees are, and these committees actually don't address the women's issues at all. Though there has been one or two actresses who have been favored, they may be enjoying so much of popularity, etc. When it comes to their self-respect or dignity of labor, actually they have been ill-treated. This is the core of her, paper. And another thing which she mentioned was cultural expectations of women is as patriarchal as elsewhere in movie industry. That was something very crucial to her paper. And then she also took up the other issue like extra labor or extra people in movie. And here she spoke of the role of women who enact as extra laborers, how they have been denied all sorts of facilities on the one hand, actually they are dehumanized. And this kind of injustice is something which the committees really don't address. That was what Professor Meenakshi Pillai said. And then she said, this kind of injustice actually can be extended to literature as well as to other publishing industry also. Thank you. With this, I thank Professor Minati Pillai for presenting such an interesting paper, and I open the paper for discussion. Thank you.
Um, Thank you very much. I was, I'm familiar with, what you presented, the scenario, given that EFLU has so many students coming from Kerala. So I'm educated about the scenario. I was just thinking, and I'm thinking aloud now, something that is fairly troublesome. For instance, as you said, the provocation for the formation of the committee and also the focus on working conditions of women and so on led to, in some ways, a reflection back onto women and their bodies. Whereas there is a male star. There is a male star in Kerala. There is a male star in the Kannada context as well. So this provocation to turn the gaze back to the male star and the lack of accountability in some ways, as if the male star is bigger than law, greater than law. Because at the end of the day, it was very much an issue of abduction, of wrongful, like she was confined wrongfully and so on, right? So this refusal in some ways to name or associate criminality and stardom. I'm just, reflecting on a culture that kind of breeds, a situation in which somehow one has to compensate by doing something for the women, whereas what action is required is somewhere else. So I'm just wondering, so is this whole thing being done so that you don't have to do anything on the other side? So I'm just thinking aloud because that was also a period which was very troubling. I was constantly reading about what was happening in the Kannada context, and it is very infuriating, right? So you just wonder what is this that allows for a stardom that can become a cloak for so much of criminality and this refusal to even acknowledge that a crime has been committed. So I just wanted you to reflect upon that. I think more than it being a cloak, sometimes I wonder whether it's the ingredient itself to superstardom, because see, the incident itself of a very prominent star being taken around in broad daylight in a city like Kochi in a car. The Supreme Court has the law that you cannot darken your windows. In spite of that, the car moves around Kochi, and a very prominent star is placed inside the car. Not only that, it is filled. So now this brings out where many women later on spoke about how blackmail was rampant in the industry. So the filming itself, which is again a metatext, right? The filming and the prospect of blackmail, which was part of it. Now, what happens when this is taken to court? Uh, I think it has been nearly 8 years and the actor has still not got justice. The clip containing the recording disappears from the court. Now, a digital object can be replicated. The clip itself is missing from the court. Now, how does that add to the trauma of the actor who approaches a judiciary to get redressal? But in spite of that, when the same mega, super, whatever star continues to make films and comes out with hugely resounding successes in the box office, what does it say about a certain kind of a cultural mindset which looks at stardom as something that is beyond these kinds of activities? Or maybe, that's why I raised the question, maybe it is that it actually dips into a libidinal economy that sanctions this kind of activity. That's the question. That's why in Kerala, subsequent to it, a woman leader brought out, said that there are casting councils in political parties. So, yeah. And then she was expelled, of course. I want
want to get back safely to Kerala. I'm not going to comment on that. Anything else?
It's really very nice presentation, madam. I'm being an outsider to Kerala culture and cinema. As I'm reading other cinemas like Tamil, Kannada, Telugu, there is a good representation of Dalit character in cinema. When it comes to actor or actors, so there is no representation of from this oppressed community. With reference to Malayalam cinema, there is equal representation of religious minorities. Maybe I conclude. Say, for example, Mumutty being a Muslim and Naveen Paul being a Christian. But also there is a good representation for LGBTQ. I remember one trans woman acted the leading role with Mumutty. And Mumutty himself played an important political movie, an important film was a gay actor. A very recent advertisement where Mumutty played a activist with feminist dress. So, of course, there are so many references. What I'm trying to say is, like, if you look into Malayalam cinema 3 decades ago, they were only focused on sex or sexism. So compared to other industries, Malayalam cinema has responded very well for gender and sex issues, apart from the caste. But throughout your presentation, it's not mandatory that we should focus on caste, but which I think we all need to think about the representation of these communities, either you talk about Tamil or Bollywood. At least there is a representation for Bollywood for at least all with minority likes Shah Rukh Khan, Salman Khan. With my own industry, I don't find single hero or heroine from this community. And Malayalam industry killed a heroine almost, Rosie, who was the first Dalit actress. She acted in a very famous cinema, and movie became almost blockbuster. And the Iyengaris and all film lovers came to know she is a Dalit. She was beaten up and she escaped with the lorry driver because she was scared to travel by another mode of transport, and she somehow came to Tamil Nadu and survived. So what I'm trying to say is, I think some of our academicians also look into these particular of caste, not representation, their equality, which is very much locked because we criticize Hollywood where they are more racist. But very recently, Priyanka Chopra talked about they give equal, check for even women role also. And there are so many black actors in Hollywood. So I think it's a time for Indian cinema, regional cinema, whatever we call, looking to equally representation of heroes and heroines and directors. So I'm glad there is Tamil cinema, Paranjit, Mari Selvaraj, they are bringing some sense to this gap which we need to fill. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, yes. This is my concern also, sir. Yeah. It's a good presentation, ma'am. Thank you.
You mentioned ongoing Megastar, who masterminded the crime against the actors. I wonder why he's still being. I just wonder why he's still being tolerated in the industry, even encouraged by these fanboy networks, who still call him by the moniker Ayrton, so to say. Whereas in Hollywood, again, another problematic industry by itself. At least there was one instance where this actor called Kevin Spacey, when certain allegations arise against him, he was immediately removed from his production. And concerning the mastermind mega actor, recently there has been this media campaign that I noticed, who has been restructuring his story as to show him as a victim, restructuring the story into how he was an innocent actor who was brought down at the peak of his career. So you're wondering why our industry, the Malayalam industry, is still tolerating him. These fanboy networks are as powerful as ever. Your thoughts on this?
Has also changed a lot with neoliberal capital. Think of Malayalam movie industry in the past. Say, for example, when all around India, we were talking about the religious films, we were talking about social realism in Malayalam, extremely oriented towards, geared towards social realism. But as we moved on, today we have fan clubs where, as in many other parts of India, we thought once upon a time we thought that the Malayali would never do that. But we have huge cutouts with Palabhishekam being done on the cutouts. So can you imagine in the 1970s when the new wave was happening in Kerala with Adur and Aravindan, that an age would come when the Malayali would be offering Palabhishekam to cutouts, right? So that has transpired, that has happened. So what I'm saying is, alongside capital, the nature of the industry, a very capital intensive industry, that its nature has also changed. And we cannot say that amidst all that is happening around, it will remain unchanged. It will change. And I think who doesn't love not a drought, but who doesn't love a good superstar? Whether it be in cinema, whether it be in politics, whether it be in religion, male superstars are in fashion. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
But the question you raised is also interesting because it is not just a concept that is natural, it is manufactured. It's a manufactured concept because this actor
for any aspect of that market, you will be spending crores of rupees to create the thing. They actually self-impose some of these kinds of things. They pay the channels or newspapers to call somebody a popular hero or what is that? People skill. That is the tax. People skill. People superstar. Superstar. Mega star. I mean, all kinds of things. So the more it has, but then that also is in sync with the viewing habits the spectator. Because we want bigger and bigger screens now. We want the spectacles on screen because otherwise it doesn't touch us. So the bigger the better. And the magnitude and PR work and the manufacturing of consent and the spectacle, all of them I think will be important. You cannot separate one smart from I don't think so. Maybe I don't think so. It's actually a capitalistic mindset. Yeah, they need it so yeah.
ಮೈಕ್ ಕೊಡ್ಸಿ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಮೈಕ್ ಕೊಡ್ಸಿ ಸೌಂಡ್ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ ನನಗೆ.
But then there is also something more to it. But then once upon a time, Shah Rukh Khan was also not noticed by many, for that matter. So the Rags to Riches is one of the stories in movies which attracts many of the young people, I believe. And I think it has more to do with our societal values and all of us are responsible for it. No, and infrastructure is always a problem. And infrastructure not just for everyone else.
ಹಂಗಂದ್ರೆ ದರ್ಶನ ಹೋಗಿಲ್ಲ.
ಲೈಫ್ ಅಂತರ ಮಾತಾಡೋ ಲೈಫ್ ಮಾತಾಡೋಕೆ ಕಷ್ಟ ಇದೆ. ಗುರು ಬೈಕ್ ಕೊಡೋರಿಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಲಿ ಒಂಚೂರು ವಾಯ್ಸ್ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸೈವ್ ಕೊಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಮರ. ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋದು ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡೋದು వాయిస్ కేಳಿಸ್ತಾ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ మాట్లాడేది ముఖ వినే ఉన్నాను. ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಲೈಕ್ ಕೊಡೋಕೆ ಕೇಳಿಸ್ತಾರೆ ಏನು ಆಮೇಲೆ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಲೈಕ್ ಕೊಟ್ಬಿಡ್ತೀನಿ ನಾನು ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಲೈವ್ನ Yeah.
I have a question. If you look at the root cause for the systemic oppression of women, or rather, if you look at the morphology of systemic violence against women, um, is it something to do more with the underrepresentation of women in different domains of movie production, like writing, direction, or like creative or technical field? Or is it something to do with lack of or under protection of women, which comes across the strongest of the two? Thank you.
And then keep quiet, and I say there are no contracts. And when there are no contracts, there is nothing like it you can introduce. Right? First of all, you're putting to an environment which is extremely vulnerable, which is drawn to rationalism. And then, at another level, encounter and injustice in the center. There is a secret kind of an unspelled law that it will not be brought out of the public. Bring it out of the choices first. Complex, find mindsets, like gender, red caste, you mentioned that red caste, see, when we say all this, let me ask you a very simple question. I'm reminded of the case. You hypocrite reader, if you think this happens only in the film industry, you're mistaken. It happens within the portals of academia, right? It happens everywhere. So why do you think it is only a junior artist in the film industry who is being, taken for? Do you think it is not happening in the spaces that you and I inhabit? The loss is so great.
No, I think she raised this issue. You were reference to injustice, social injustice. I think the social injustice is everywhere.
That's there. Let me take my own example. In 1990, when I was a lecturer in the university, the then chief minister brought in a law by which a clause regarding the surrender of leave
And many other things were taken off. We protested and we went on a strike for 1 month, irrespective of whichever trade unions we believe. Yeah, all of us protested. But, today, if there is something like that, at that time my salary was 2,200 rupees. Today, if there is a strike of that kind, would we protest for a month? What happens to revolutions is a question that we need to ask ourselves. What happens to dissent? What happens to opposition? What happens to the subaltern counter-public that I was referring to? Because when the stakes are too high, protest is also dissipated. So, I don't know whether it answers, maybe in a tangent, but it does, I think.
So, if there are more number of questions, that means the session was really insightful and very thought-provoking. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for coming all the way from Kerala and giving your precious time for us, for our department in this conference. I invite Professor, sorry, it's time to felicitate Meena Pillai. Again, I would like to call Professor Vijay Sheshadri to come on the stage to felicitate Meena Pillai.
Just have a word. What Srikanth said, Meena has come all the way from Kerala. When we were in, I think, Calicut University for a conference, Professor Ravichandra, I, Chandra, and Professor Ramchandran Nair was there. And he said, thanks for coming all the way from Mysore. So Professor Ravichandra said, my teacher, and Chandra also said, we don't have any problems at all. Just like wild elephants come to Kerala and they come back to Karnataka. So the same is the case here. We go, they also come. Only off late, over the past, I think, 5-6 years, there's not much of movement of elephants. Now it will start again. Thank you.
I request Professor Nandini Sahu, Vice Chancellor of Indian University of West Bengal, to come on the stage to felicitate Professor Sujata Ma'am. In another 15 minutes, we will commence the valedictory functions. We are waiting for Sadhu Kokila, the chairman of Karnataka Film Academy, who is arriving, who is on the way. So once he comes, we will commence this valedictory function. And meanwhile, our studio director Sidney Gowda has something to exhibit about his cinema. So he has directed 6 movies. He's a member of Karnataka Film Chambers.
Not that presentation, please.
ನಿಖಿಲ್ ಎಂಡ್ ಕೊಡ್ಲಾ ಎಂಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಾ